Hello, good afternoon. Today we're back to Hope and Resiliency. Dr. Milton Erickson. See if I can get this light out of the way a little bit more. um, Last final strategy called utilization. So I'll read most of most of this chapter, a lot of this chapter, not all of it, enough for you to give you an idea that you taste the flavor of it. Utilization, the final and most distinctive strategy in this book, is the defining hallmark of Erickson's clinical approach. If Erickson's philosophy of healing were to be condensed to the single statement, help patients recognize the goodness of their mind and body, that utilization is the most direct manifestation of this mandate. The dynamics underlying the strategy are simple, though its clinical application can seem counterintuitive. As will be seen in the following case examples, Erickson's ability to make full use of this strategy was both profound and inspiring. Here's a case report, and it says Jesus. That's the title of this case report. When Erickson was on staff at Worcester State Hospital in Massachusetts, there was a young man who insisted that he was Jesus. He paraded about as the Messiah with a sheet draped around him. Furthermore, he felt strongly that it was his mission to impose Christianity on people. This behavior resulted in complete alienation. The patient continued his attempts to engage others socially, but in an aggressive manner that ensured his rejection. Acting as a sort of father figure, Erickson told him, quote, "Since your purpose on earth is to serve mankind, there is a task you can do that will serve people." The first mission Erickson gave him was to smooth the dirt on the tennis courts. God surely did not intend for all those lumps to be on the tennis court. After some time, Erickson approached him again. "I understand you have experience as a carpenter." Because Jesus is said there to have been a carpenter, the patient had to accept this statement. Erickson then instructed him to serve mankind by using his carpentry skills. To build a bookcase, he wanted him to use his skills to build a bookcase for the psychological laboratory. The patient eventually became the laboratory handyman. That's from J. Haley, 1973. It is interesting to speculate on the many possible reasons for becoming seduced by the idea of being Jesus. In most cases, delusional thinking represents a failure to cope, a narrowing of perceptual learning and processing. This type of intense inward focus allows the individual to ignore threats posed by an environment that is otherwise beyond control. And just as interesting is the capacity of those who are not psychotic to also shut themselves off from reason. As Erickson explains in Erickson and Zeig, 1977, quote, "When you understand how humans really defend their intellectual ideas and how emotional they get about it, you should realize that the first thing in psychotherapy is not to try to compel them to change their ideation. Rather, you go along with it and change it in a gradual fashion and create situations wherein they themselves willingly change their thinking." Or as one of Dan Short's 14-year-old patients jokingly stated, "I'll see it when I believe it." Regardless of the clinical concern, most people have a tremendous need to be known and accepted. The clinical significance of this interpersonal dynamic is reflected in Erickson's approach. As noted by Haley, the liberal use of acceptance was Erickson's fundamental approach to human problems, whether or not he was using hypnosis. In order for acceptance to feel genuine, the patient must know that the therapist is fully informed of the hidden parts of self associated with shame or disgust. Don't miss that. Don't pass by that line about hidden parts of the self, because working with different age versions of yourself, or eventually your clients or your patients, can become very key and pivotal to change and adjustments that are very agency giving, very helpful. I like the idea of working on that myself, because the more I do that, the more I already know when somebody presents uh, with something that calls for the need to work with their um, parts. You can call them parts, call them little um, infant and child versions of self, um, pieces of mind, pieces within the person, etc. Erickson's philosophy of healing was characterized by his attention to the goodness of the patient's mind and body. This paved the way for utilization and a shift in the client's focus of attention. After all, how much hope can there be if the individual's constitutional resources are regarded as flawed or useless? In the Tao, there's a very clear distinction. They teach that there are two minds, and or could be seen as two levels of mind. One is the human mind that thinks in the society and thinks amongst um, societal constructs and environments, etc. And that's just sharing the same thought over and over again. Really, it's not. There's nothing new or creative there. But there are new thoughts. There are creative thoughts that come in from the clear, pure mind. The I call it the universal vast mind. Christians from the Bible would call it the mind of Christ. Um, Others would call it the quantum field, etc. There are a variety of ways to refer to that clear space, clear place where there is always perfect, true, clear understanding, real understanding of how things really are and how things really work, including for you. In moments of weakness, people often require additional amounts of external validation. For many, a lifetime is spent seeking out someone to help them believe in themselves. But providing the level of acceptance they require is not always easy. An example, when providing treatment to someone with numerous psychosomatic illnesses, it is tempting to dismiss him or her right to experience her or his right to experience both suffering and care. When hearing statements such as, "You're not really sick, it's all in your head," the patient or client could feel terribly invalidated, which might be the issue that caused him or her to seek care in the first place. You can do for them. Yet, when focusing on your abilities and their problems, an implied message, pay attention to subtleties, not just here, but in all of life. When focusing on your abilities and their problems, an implied message of therapist superiority and patient inferiority is communicated. This is why utilization requires a special type of acceptance that sometimes seem counterintuitive. In order for therapy to be successful, there needs to be a willful participation of the patient and employment of his or her physical and psychological resources in the task of living. With willful action comes responsibility, and with responsibility comes increased control. Therefore, the practitioner accepts the patterns of behavior that most strongly characterize the individual. In many cases, this means accepting the pathological behavior targeted for change. Acceptance, key word. The term utilization is used to describe this clinical strategy because it points toward the meaningful involvement of the patient in the healing process. Points toward the meaningful involvement of the patient in the healing process. A recurring theme in Erickson's teaching was the importance of eliciting the participation of the patient's entire personality. We're back to the every part of the person's personality. He calls it the personality. There, just know that when somebody's not acting like themselves, when you're not acting like yourself, when I'm not acting like myself, it's often coming from an early version of myself that got triggered into play. So, in having a conversation with somebody and something comes up, or an argument starts, or there's disagreement, or there's misunderstanding or false accusation, those things, some of those things for me, and all of those things for somebody's, could trigger an early place in that person's life where they were young and they were misunderstood, and that little child, that 4-year old, was hurt. So to go work with that 4-year old or help the adult client participant before you go parent and lovingly accept that little child and help that little child understand in that original picture more about themselves, beyond more clearly understand about themselves beyond what they registered in that original moment. Changing that interpretation, it's not necessarily changing the past, but it definitely changes the present when it's effectively done. And the adult being can feel palpable changes, can feel. I have felt. My clients have felt. Not all of them, but many of them, maybe most of them, when I've worked with them in this way. Not everybody needs to be worked with in this way, but be aware. Old things like that, call them wounds if you will, call them misunderstandings, call them misinterpretations, but they reinterpreting them correctly, properly, clearly, constructively to that original little child can change a person's life, at least in that area. Utilization is as much a point of view as it is a process. If the patient threatens to slap the therapist in the face, then this energy can be accepted as something to be utilized as part of a cooperative endeavor toward the clinical objective. Cooperative. So you're becoming a collaborator with the patient. Just like you students, I look at you, in one sense, I look at you as colleagues because you're beginning your role now as you were in class. Um, and in the process of teaching, facilitating learning, facilitating change, because learning is change. If you don't change, you haven't learned, you've just got notes. Um, we're collaborating. When you send in an APA paper and you don't yet really know how to use APA writing style, then you send in what you do know. And I write notes on the paper that you wrote so you can know what to add or take away or adjust and how to adjust it. Because that's the way change occurs. That's one of the ways. It's hopefully gently um, pointing to what is accurately written, and what needs to be changed, adjusted, modified, so that when you move on to your next level of education, you know a lot of the specifics, at least in the basic format of APA writing style, you know how to do it. You're not starting from zero. So, and if you really want to get ahead, it's better to be prepared, to me, so you don't enter totally cold into a graduate program. uh, that you write it. You write it every day. Get a manual and practice it. You want to refine. Keyword again. Develop, refine. Get out the old habits around writing. Activate your mind to be dynamically engaged with the writing process per the science, the social sciences prescribed way of writing, which is according to the American Psychological Association, APA. So we're collaborating. It's a collaborative experience, just like Erickson's doing with his patients. He calls them patients because he's an MD. There's the type of therapeutic environment necessary for utilization to occur. First, you will show me your behavior and I will accept it. Then I will respond with the behavior that you can accept. As Erickson explained, the initial acceptance of the patient's behavior and a ready collaboration, stimulate the patient to further effort. Once patients are engaged in this way, and as the pattern of give and take continues, they become more and more committed to a relationship aimed at achieving clinical objectives. Because patients' personality traits are welcomed by the therapist, utilization diminishes the likelihood of a power struggle. Rather than being met with confrontation, such as when patients are told they must change flawed aspects of themselves, there is an attempt to evoke more of who they are and what they are doing. When patients are invited to act in accord with their own constitution, they are less likely to feel coerced into change. Not only does this diminish resistance to therapy, but more importantly, it places the locus of change where it belongs. Any aspect of the individual and his or her life situation can be utilized in therapy. The objective of utilization is broad rather than specific, and symptom removal is not the primary aim. The sort of thinking that allows only one acceptable outcome is too linear and does not permit much maneuverability. Thus, utilization is not focused on changing the individual, but instead there is a striving toward acceptance. For Erickson, utilization was an important means of providing patients with options. He then trusted they would make the choice that was right for them. Utilization is not trickery, and it is certainly not meant to show off the cleverness of the clinician. It is meant to enhance the subjective sense of self that develops within the patient. Patient is the focus. Whatever approach we use, the patient is always, the client is, the participant is, the one who has come for assistance is the focus. Here's a simple bind. After this, we'll see a double bind. This is a simple bind as one subcategory of utilization. The woman who wanted to waste time. A woman who weighed 255 pounds came to Erickson with the problem of obesity. Uncomfortable with the male authority figures and highly resistant toward anyone attempting to manipulate her, her resistance to change had caused her to abandon a previous therapist. When it became apparent to Erickson that she did not want to talk about issues that were relevant to therapy, he described the situation as he saw it. I believe that no matter what I do, you will continue to insist on wanting the therapy hour, wasting the therapy hour. I thought it was going to say wanting to take over the therapy hour. No matter what I do, you will continue to insist on wasting the therapy hour. This idea appealed to her. She liked that idea. She worked to convince Erickson that he was correct. Erickson then conceded that she was in fact manipulating him and that it was a privilege for her that she had to pay. According to Erickson, her payment included gradual improvement in her overall condition. Erickson often emphasized the importance of not trying to control other people, and he felt that the more helpful thing was to create a therapeutic opportunity that had strong appeal for the patient. This opportunity was presented as a gift. It was something that bound energy to action. Now, I want to put another title to that I've mentioned before in another video. Um, Greg, one of the students in class this time, um, pointed this out, was interested in this concept. We've all heard you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make a horse drink. And that's really not a truism. Not in the sense that it's always true. It is the horse's will that is the pivot point here. But if you put salt in a horse's oats, that horse will usually drink water. So if you lead that horse to water, it will likely drink. And what Erickson has done here, where it says Erickson felt that the more helpful thing was to create a therapeutic opportunity that had strong appeal. There's the salt. Create an opportunity, neutral opportunity, not telling them they have to change and not trying to work on them, getting your tools out and hammer and chisel and wrenches. Create a therapeutic opportunity that has strong appeal for the patient. And when that opportunity is seen and it's felt into, it's something that can bind energy, bring energy into action. Double bind. Case report called Johnny's Big Chassis. I've read this before on another video. As mentioned earlier, 12-year-old Johnny was dragged into Erickson's office by his irate parents. Erickson confronted the parents for their harsh treatment of the child and quickly dismissed them from his office. It should be noted that this occurred many years ago, prior to child abuse laws and before protective services were established. After marveling over Johnny's size, 5 foot 10 inches tall and weighing 170 pounds, Erickson took some pressure off Johnny by stating, "Your parents want you to have a permanently dry bed right away, and that is simply unreasonable. In the first place, you have been too darned busy to bother to learn to have a dry bed. You have a great big beautiful frame with great big powerful muscles to handle it. Your chassis is one that took a lot of energy to build and is almost as big as your father's. And you are only 12 years old. It took an awful lot of energy to build a body as big and strong as the one you've got, and you didn't have any energy left over for such unimportant things as a dry bed, or mowing grass, or being teacher's pet. But you will soon be full grown, bigger than your father, and you haven't got far to go to beat him. Then you'll have all that energy and horsepower you have been putting into growing to spread around to other things that you want, like a permanently dry bed. In fact, you are so close to being finished with building a great big powerful body that you've probably already got extra energy to spare." Having gotten his attention, Erickson stated, "As for your bedwetting, you have had that habit for a long, long time, and this is Monday. Do you think you can stop wetting the bed and have a permanent dry bed by tomorrow night?" I don't think so, and you don't think so. In fact, nobody with any brains at all will think that sort of thing. Do you think you will have a permanent dry bed by Wednesday? I don't. You don't. Nobody does. In fact, I don't expect you to have a dry bed at all this week. Why should you? You have had a lifelong habit, and I just simply don't expect you to have a dry bed this week. I expect it to be wet every night this week. You also expect that we are in agreement. I also expect it to be wet next Monday, too. But there is one thing that really puzzles me, and I'm really absolutely and thoroughly puzzled. Will you have a dry bed on accident by Wednesday, or will it be on Thursday? And will you have to wait until Friday morning to find out? Johnny listened attentively to these ideas. The look on his face indicated that these were thoughts he had not considered before. Then Erickson gave Johnny an important assignment. You come in and tell me next Friday afternoon whether it was Wednesday or Thursday, because I don't know. You don't know. The back of your mind doesn't know. The front of your mind doesn't know. Nobody knows. We will have to wait until Friday when you come back here and tell me which day your bed was first dry, Wednesday or Thursday. Friday afternoon, Johnny came in beaming. He told Erickson something that Erickson described as delightful. Doctor, you were mistaken. It wasn't Wednesday or Thursday. It was Wednesday and Thursday. Erickson responded cautiously, well, just two dry beds in succession does not mean that you're going to have a permanent dry bed by next week. Why, half the month of January is gone. Certainly, in the last half of January, you can't learn to have a permanent dry bed, and February is a very short month. After giving Johnny some time to absorb these ideas, Erickson continued, Johnny, there's one thing I would like to have you understand. I don't know if your permanent dry bed will begin on March the 17th, St. Patrick's Day, or if it will begin on April Fool's Day, April 1st. I don't know, and you don't know either. But there is one thing I do want you to know. When it begins, it is none of my business. Not ever, ever, ever is it to be any of my business. In follow-up, Erickson reported that Johnny was fully grown and practicing medicine. He had gotten married and had a boy of his own. He was kind to his son. At the time of follow-up, he was 6'4" and weighed over 240 pounds, all of it muscle. He was big enough to look down on the little old man who used to rub his face in the wet bed. Erickson reports that he looked down with tolerance and amusement upon that little old man. According to Johnny, Dad did the best he could. He didn't know any better. That's Erickson in 1952 and 2001. Here, how is a double bind different from a single bind? As implied by its name, it is more binding. There is less room for escape. The technique can be described as a sort of benevolent ambush. Its use is based on anticipation of predicted future behaviors, which are employed as a therapeutic contingency. There is a matter of utilization, utilizing foreseeable outcomes. In some instances, Erickson would even employ the patient's resistance to therapy as part of the double bind. Erickson provided the following formula. You present therapeutic ideas to people and make them contingent on the things that are going to occur. Using the double bind, the clinician can introduce new problem-solving behavior by making it contingent on the expression of highly probable thoughts, feelings, or actions. This type of contingency is normally not recognized by the patient. It is a complex form of commitment in which the person is bound not only by their words and desire, but also by firmly established patterns of behavior. There are numerous opportunities for the use of double bind in therapy. Anytime the patient is asked to demonstrate a symptom, a double bind is created. The patient wants to be understood and might not recognize that. If he can start something, then at some point he must decide to stop it. Every intentional beginning must have an intentional end. If the therapist has the proper attitude, the double bind is seen as an extension of the patient's right to decide. It is the power of the patient's commitment to healing that makes the double bind effective. Otherwise, the therapist's remarks would just be ignored. As stated in the introduction, healing is not something to be forced on an individual. The therapeutic double bind is instead offered as one of multiple paths toward the outcome that the patient desires. When done correctly, it is an opportunity for patients to realize explicitly or implicitly their innate power to change. And that's enough. Utilization. Interesting, salty, encouraging, hopeful, helpful. I love reading this stuff. I hope you enjoy it too. Hope you find it useful for your own life and gradually for those with whom you work. Thanks for joining me. See you next time.